Hello, welcome to part B. In this part, I'm really just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the artificial sweeteners that are out there. I'm calling it sweet nothings. Oh, sweet nothing. Um, yeah. So, the discovery of non-carbohydrate sweeteners was a pretty amazing accidental history. The first of them to be discovered happened in 1879 by this guy here, Konstantin Fahlberg. He was working in the lab and he spilled a chemical on his hand. Later, having dinner, he stuck his hand in his mouth and he noticed a sweetness in the bread that he was eating. Actually, I guess it was on his bread. He traced the sweetness all the way back to the chemical that he later called saccharin. He traced that sweetness back by tasting residues on his hands and like sticking his clothes in his mouth, and then finally just like chemicals that were in the lab in his mouth. Super bad chemical practice. Anyways, by 1907, saccharin was used as a replacement for sugar in food for diabetics because it doesn't actually raise your blood sugar at all. It is not metabolized by the body for energy. You don't get energy from this stuff. It goes into the body, and the liver's like, oh, this is some like messed up stuff I shouldn't have eaten, and it breaks it down and shuttles it out of the body. Actually, it puts quite a load on your liver. It's not actually good for you, but if you're a diabetic and you have a sweet tooth, I guess it's better than nothing. So anyways, by the 1960s, it was used by the soft drink industry as the sweetener in these diet sodas. And anybody who's ever had a diet soda has probably drank a bunch of saccharin. This is what we now call sweet and low, the pink packages when you go into a restaurant or something like that. Stuff is super sweet, actually. It's 3 times sweeter than table sugar. So a third of this stuff equals the same sweetness as you would get from a tablespoon of regular sugar. Sweetness index of 300 and essentially no calories, just a nasty chemical burden on the liver. The next one that we're going to talk about is cyclamate. This one is actually not particularly sweet. It's about a third as sweet as table sugar. We call it sucralil when you see it on tables in restaurants. It's a sodium salt of this molecule, not too dissimilar from saccharin. So this guy here, Michael Sveda, discovered cyclamate again by accident. Can you believe it? He was smoking a cigarette as a graduate student, and his hands were dirty. Apparently, he had this stuff all over his hands. The cigarette tasted sweet in his mouth. He was actually working on antipyretic, so meaning like anti-fever drugs in the lab. And he had set the cigarette, I guess he'd been smoking in the lab. That's right. Smoking in the lab, and set his cigarette down on the lab bench. Boy, different times. How far we've come. He stuck it back in his mouth and discovered the sweet taste of cyclamate. Whoa. Not what happens in the lab today, hopefully. Also, not especially good for your liver. All right, acesulfame, also known as the sweet one. It's about twice as sweet as table sugar. Discovered by a guy named Karl Klaus in 1967. Again, totally by accident, not looking to figure out a new sweetener. He noticed this sweet taste when he licked his finger to pick up a piece of paper. What is up with these chemists and their bad lab technique? You may notice here as we're going through these a similar structural motif. There's this sulfonyl group here, this sulfur with a couple double bonded oxygens to it, often associated with a ring of some sort. Um, yeah, all triggering the sweetness receptor on your tongue in pretty similar ways. Again, similar molecule in terms of the metabolism of this. No calories. The body's not using this for energy at all. It basically goes into the liver. The body says, "What is this crap?" And it does its best to eliminate it out through the urine. Yeah, asulfame. Let's keep the fun. Let's keep the fun going with this one here, aspartame, and this is what is the active ingredient in either NutraSweet or Equal, whatever. And this actually does look quite a bit different than some of the other compounds. Its sweetness index is about twice that of table sugar, so pretty sweet stuff. Here's the fun story. 1965, there was a chemist working at this company called G.D. Searle. His name was Jim Slatter, and he was actually looking for a molecule to treat gastric ulcers. So one of the steps in the research process for the molecules he was making was making this dipeptide that you see right here is a dipeptide intermediate, aspartyl phenylalanine methyl ester, and he didn't realize it, but he spilled some of this crap on his hands. Later, he licked his finger, reaching for a piece of paper, of course, unsanitary lab technique, and he noticed the sweet taste. He and a friend decided to test some. It's like, hey, what do you know? Let's dump some in our coffee. They drank their coffee, and whoa, they confirmed it tastes sweet. Now, aspartame is the world's top artificial sweetener. It's made with genetically modified bacteria. They don't even make it in the lab anymore. It's all made with bacteria, genetically modified bacteria, and it's in over 5,000 products. It sounds like, oh, finally, we've come up with something that's not hepatotoxic. That is a sweetener, a very sweet molecule. Yeah, there's always a dirty part to these kind of stories. There's no free lunch, no sweet cookie without calories, without paying for it somehow. Anyways, here we go. On September 30th, 1980, there was a board of inquiry from the FDA that actually denied Searle's petition for approval for the safety of this stuff. So they had been trying since the 60s to get the stuff approved. So 67 they discovered it, and 13 years in producing it and trying to get the government to say it was okay. But there had been no FDA commissioner that allowed it on the market because they knew that it was a neurotoxin and it was carcinogen. Causes cancer. It can cause cancer in your kidneys, in the brain, in the liver. It's also a neurotoxin, meaning it destroys your nerve cells. Not something you probably actually want to put a whole lot of in your coffee. However, look at this guy. I don't know if any of you recognize him, Donald Rumsfeld. He was the CEO of G.D. Searle at the time and said he would call in his favors to get it approved. Turns out that Rumsfeld was pals with Ronald Reagan, and it was on Reagan's transition team. A day after taking office, he appointed Arthur Hull Hayes as FDA commissioner. Yeah, this guy Rumsfeld, most of you probably recognize him from being in the George W. Bush administration. He was really the architect of the war in Iraq that followed 9/11, kind of a hawkish individual, but also not apparently particularly concerned about cancer and neurotoxins. In 1981, the newly appointed commissioner here, Hayes, ignored almost 2 decades of scientists in the FDA saying that this stuff is nasty shit. He overruled all of that and approved aspartame for use in dry goods. So sweet. Way to go, Donnie. Good job. All right. Let's round this depressing story out here. with sucralose. So sucralose is commercially available as something called Splenda. This stuff is freaking unreal. It is 6 times, a whopping 600 on the sweetness index, 6 times sweeter than regular white table sugar. And you can look at this and see that really all this is fructose. That's the structure of fructose there, with a bunch of chlorines stuck on it to sort of supercharge the parts of the molecule that hit the taste receptor in an activity where, with the molecular modeling, when we looked at the parts of the molecule that affected sweetness, it was C3s through C6, and you can see that this chlorine in the glucose residue here is well positioned to cause a much stronger reaction with this sweetness receptor on the tongue. Anyways, this company, Tate & Lyle, British sugar company, was looking for all kinds of ways to use sucrose as a chemical intermediate for the production of God knows what. But they were exploring all these different halogenated sugars. They were synthesizing them and then testing them. This graduate student, Shashikant Podnis, misunderstood. This is amazing. Every single one of these artificial sweeteners was discovered by malfeasance, accident. Like people with incredibly bad lab technique. This person misunderstood the request for testing of a chlorinated sugar as a request for tasting. He stuck this stuff in his mouth, and he discovered that all sorts of chlorinated sugars are sweet as shit, some hundreds of times or even thousands of times as great as sucrose. So Splenda is just one of them. And they stuck the chlorine on sucrose, and we get this like wickedly sweet sugar. But these chlorinated alkyl sugars are actually pretty freaking gnarly for the body. And what are you going to do? Either avoid sugar, in my opinion, or eat the stuff in real moderation if you're going to eat this. Okay, that's my whole tale about artificial sweeteners. Thanks for listening. Bye.